What if losing your memory didn't mean losing yourself? What if, in fact, it unlocked hidden depths of creativity and empathy you never knew existed in yourself or your loved one? Today, we dive into the mysteries of the social brain, exploring how neurodegenerative diseases, while devastating, can also reveal astonishing resilience and adaptability of the human mind. We'll challenge everything you thought you knew about aging and identity, asking, are we truly defined by our memories, or is there something more to us, something that endures even as our brains change? Stay tuned because this conversation will reshape how you see the human brain and the very essence of human connection. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. This is Jen Fink, your host. We are talking about something kind of interesting today. Not that every week's not interesting. We're talking about the social brain. And with me today is Dr. Bruce Miller. I was mentioning how I kind of felt like I already knew him because he is a co-author of a past guest's book. That one was Finding the Right Words. And with both of us is Virginia Strum. I think I got that right, Strum. She pronounced it for me, and I think I just butchered it. Thank you for joining me. Why don't Dr. Miller, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Virginia.
Well, first, thank you so much, and please call me Bruce for having Virginia and I today. I'm a distinguished professor of neurology and psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, and a founder of our Global Brain Health program. I also lead the Memory and Aging Center, where Virginia and I both work looking after patients and doing research.
I'm familiar with UCSF. My dad had a kidney transplant there, and I attended the school across town. I went to San Francisco State, so familiar with it from an outsider's perspective. And what do you do there at the university, Virginia?
I'm a professor in the Department of Neurology and Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. I'm a neuropsychologist and a neuroscientist, and I'm the director of the Clinical Affective Neuroscience Laboratory.
Wow, you guys are impressive. So the two of you wrote a book. It's about the social brain. I don't have a copy of it in front of me, so I only have part of the name. Why don't you guys tell me the name of the book and the motivation behind writing it, and then we'll talk about how losing our memories isn't necessarily the end all to what our brains can do.
Go ahead, Virginia.
Our book is called Mysteries of the Social Brain, Understanding Human Behavior Through Science. And in the book, we describe various people who have neurodegenerative disorders, who have changes in their social abilities and their language. These are people that Bruce has seen in the Memory and Aging Center clinic over the years, and each person teaches us important lessons about abilities that we all have in our social brains that allow us to interact as kind and generous and empathic humans, allow us to communicate and form relationships. And sometimes when people have loss or changes in the brain regions that support these abilities, they might struggle to interact with others in the ways that they used to, but they tell us a lot of important information about how the social brain works in all of us.
Go ahead, Bruce.
And I was going to say, Jennifer, one of the things about most of the patients that we talk about who have degeneration in the front of the brain is that their memories are relatively intact. Alzheimer's tends to hit the hippocampus, where we learn and remember, and the back of the brain, where our navigation and some of our language skills are. So the big difference here is that while Alzheimer's disease patients often are, at least in the early stages, quite socially correct, and as Virginia has shown, sometimes even kinder when the disease starts than they were before it started. But the frontotemporal dementia patients, because of where the disease hits in the brain, lose things like empathy, a sense of fairness, kindness. And so it's often a presentation that people overlook, or they're thought to have a psychiatric problem or a midlife crisis. But I think, this is a very serious group of neurodegenerative conditions. And one of the beautiful parts of the story, I think, that we try to tell are the caregivers, because the caregivers, even without, much reinforcement, stick with these people and stick with our patients, often at enormous personal cost and suffering. And so we talk about the caregivers' brains as well. What happens in the caregiver, the things that improve, the strengthening of these important circuits in the front of the brain that really allowed human beings to get along and live together.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the things that I comment on a lot is that caregivers should essentially be given an honorary PhD, because we learn, medical things, advocacy, legal stuff, time management. I mean, like, the skill set required to be an effective, compassionate caregiver are numerous. And I frequently talk to CEOs and HR departments about how, there might be a gap in this person's resume, but ask them what that gap's about. Don't just dismiss it as, oh yeah, they were sitting at home watching TV with mom who had dementia, because pretty sure that's not the common caregiver experience. It wasn't mine, that's for sure. And it's just, it's when you say that there's things that happen in our brains that make caregiving, I guess, better, that gets my curiosity going. So let's talk about that one a little bit. What kind of changes happen in a caregiver's brain besides sometimes it just feels like it explodes?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a few words, but Virginia's, I think, really written eloquently and beautifully about ways that caregivers can protect themselves. So this is the hardest set of diseases, as hard as Alzheimer's is, because many of the social pieces of the brain are spared. I think the caregivers often get a lot of love back and touches and appreciation. With this disease, the first findings is loss of empathy.
You're
So
talking about FTD.
FTD. So imagine being a caregiver where many of the beautiful things that you do are not recognized, or and it's not intentional. This is just the way our brains work. There are parts of the brain that allow us to remember. There are other parts that allow us to appreciate others. And so this is why we call it Mysteries of the Social Brain, our book, because this is such a mysterious set of disorders that affect the very human nature of who we are. And so for caregivers, I think there are different ways that caregivers approach this. Some flee, abandon, and I'm not condemning it. I think, there may be various reasons. And some stick it out. And I think that's really the most beautiful story, I think, of these illnesses, is that the caregiver appreciates the humanity of their loved one, appreciates their shared history, and appreciate that that person really needs my help now, even if they can't say thank you. And so there are these parts of the brain that our patients are losing, that our caregivers are expanding. They become more empathic. They think about, ways to help the person, without empathy, navigate social situations. I think caregiving is one of the most underappreciated things that we have in our society. And, it requires huge parts of the brain. Virginia and I write a lot about the right side of the brain being much more focused on social activities, whether it's fairness, empathy, respect. These are things that, are disproportionately located where caregivers work. And this is, a story that I think we wanted to tell when we wrote this book. Some of them suffer enormously in this process. And I think the story with Alzheimer's. People get depression. Some people even get physical illnesses in that process of caregiving. But Virginia has thought a lot about this and has written and done research on this, and has ideas about how caregivers can do even better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Give us the secrets, Virginia.
Well, I think in general, as Bruce described, when we use any cognitive or brain system a lot, it can become stronger. And so just like if you practice, doing math or playing tennis, those systems become stronger as you improve and get better, that the social brain might be similar in a lot of those same ways. Like if you practice empathy, the circuitry that's supporting your abilities to detect emotions in other people, or even to share other people's feelings, might become stronger. It can be a double-edged sword, because sometimes feeling someone else's emotions can be helpful to understanding how they're doing and what they need. On the other hand, if you're overwhelmed by feelings of distress and pain and sadness, that can be also overwhelming for caregivers. And Bob Levinson and Jennifer Merrilies have done research looking at how even a patient's pattern of atrophy or tissue loss in their brain can predict caregivers' mental health. And so that's this very, connected relationship where the specific changes in the patient might be really important to consider when thinking about the caregiver's risks, in the area of mental health or physical health. And we know that social isolation can be common when people are caring for someone with dementia or someone who has dementia. Sometimes their friends, retreat or are nervous to come by or don't know what to say. And so people often withdraw, and that can be really hard for caregivers in addition to the patients. So trying to maintain social relationships is really critical for brain health, but also for well-being, as well as basic things that we all should be doing, like eating well and taking care of our sleep and our stress, exercising, all the basics, taking some time for ourselves. Yeah.
So you said looking at the atrophy in the patient's brain helps you kind of understand what a caregiver is going through. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, that was a study that was done and by Bob Levinson's group, and Sandy Louie was the first author on this study. And they were looking to see whether, the changes in the patient's brain might have anything to do with the emotional experiences that the caregiver had. And just like Bruce was describing, in someone with Alzheimer's disease, for example, they often have trouble remembering day-to-day events. And as a caregiver, there might be strategies that you could use to help that person, or also people can understand very easily that that's a brain problem. Like, oh, they just can't remember where their medicine is, they have Alzheimer's. It's easy to understand that. But when the person's behavior and ability to love and care for you declines, that is much harder to understand as a brain problem only, and then people take it on and feel very hurt and sad, as they rightfully should. It's a devastating experience to feel a loved one pull away and not seem to care about you anymore. So that kind of disease, and that often happens in frontotemporal dementia, FTD, can have much more negative impacts on a caregiver's mental health and cause things like depression and anxiety. So
I actually have two caregivers that I know. One's a past guest. The past guest, her husband had younger onset FTD. And when you hear her story, I don't know how before the diagnosis, he went through all of these changes, lost jobs, lost money, just all the negative things, and including some really huge social embarrassments for her and their younger kids, him doing inappropriate things at family events in the public. And, listening to her, I was like, man, I can't believe she didn't divorce this guy before he got this diagnosis. And the other one is a gal who has her own mental and physical health issues, because we don't have enough options and good choices for care, moved her mom in with her and her husband. And unfortunately for her, mom is verbally abusive every single day. So as bad as Alzheimer's is, and my mom had Alzheimer's, my maternal grandmother had vascular dementia, my maternal great grandmother had some form of dementia. I think FTD is worse. I really have to say, I think FTD is a lot worse. My mom thought I was her best friend at the end of her life. So that's kind of an upgrade. She was very social, which was pretty typical for her. Memory care was actually one of the best things I did for her, even though she was adamant that's not what she wanted, because she had friends who understood her, who were like her. So it was, people didn't roll their eyes when she launched into her repetitive story for the 700th time. And it was, it was a difficult decision to move her there, but I knew that was the right thing for her and our entire family, the extended family. And a lot of that has to do with, she was able to be social with people who were like her and accepted her. So I don't know if FTD would have allowed the same kind of success in memory care.
Well, as you say, and the figures bear this out, that people get sick with Alzheimer's as caregivers. Not everyone, but many, and the figures are almost double for frontotemporal dementia. So the burdens that people with Alzheimer's disease face, as Virginia described, are much more severe with frontotemporal dementia. And even making it worse, a lot of these patients are young onset. So they're in the prime of their life, they're working, they're raising children, and all of a sudden, see these profound deficits in the ability to work or to raise children or to be a proper spouse. So these are exceptional burdens. And Virginia's thought of, I think, one of the most exciting interventions for caregivers, which she's studied and written about, and that's her ideas about awe, which I hope you could share, Virginia.
Go ahead. That sounds terrific.
Sure. Well, we did a study of the emotion of awe a few years ago, and I mean AWE. Sometimes people think I mean AHH or AWW, but AWE, the emotion of awe, in healthy older adults. So this was healthy individuals between the ages of 60 and 90. And we asked the question of whether, if we promoted the emotion of awe, if we could increase experiences of awe in these healthy older adults, and if we did, if it also had benefits in what we called prosocial emotions. And these are emotions such as compassion and gratitude and admiration. So we designed an awe walk study where everyone in the study was asked to take a weekly 15-minute walk outside. And the people in the awe walk condition, and they were randomly assigned to this group, were also taught how to experience awe by looking at the details of the world around them, looking at the world with fresh eyes like a child does, trying to go somewhere new if they could, but they could go wherever they wanted. And that was really it. And we followed them for 8 weeks, and we emailed them every day and asked them about their emotional experiences. And we asked them to send us selfies when they took these walks. And essentially, we found that the people who were in that awe walk group did have greater gains in awe than the people who took those, what we called control walks. But they also had greater increases in those pro-social emotions, compassion and gratitude over time. We looked at their selfies. They had bigger smiles over time in their pictures, and they had greater feelings of social connection. So, feeling connected and feeling a sense of community is really important for the brain as we age, in addition to these kind of calming, positive experiences. And so that study was done in healthy people, but we think that in people who have some more mental health symptoms and more loneliness and anxiety, that kind of very simple, activity might benefit their well-being as well as their brain health. So that's the idea that Bruce is referring to.
I had an awe walk that ended up not so awe. I think at the time had 2 golden retrievers, and I was appreciating the actual absolutely beautiful scent of the pine trees around me when one of the dogs did his business. Immediately erased all of the lovely pine scent. But I think about that sometimes, not the dog part, but the pine tree part, because there's only certain paths one can walk in our neighborhood. We have a lake, we have a golf course, but there's like 2 to 3 paths that are convenient. And is there a way that we can like build up our awe as we're, walking the DOG or just going out for our own mental health? Was there, sometimes I'll take a walk after working most of the afternoon, not today because it's pouring, but just to get fresh air, get out of the house, all those good things. So I know that's beneficial to me and my brain. But is there a way I can like up that walk to make it even better?
Yeah, we don't have to go somewhere special to feel awe. It's easier to feel awe if you go somewhere, beautiful or majestic, or take a trip to somewhere you've never been, or visit an amazing museum exhibit. But we can feel awe just in the little things, just even on a regular walk outside your home, you can stop and look at the details of the bark on a tree, or how the leaves are reflecting in the sunlight, or how a bird's wings are flapping in unison in a flock, or all those very small moments count as awe. And I think of them as kind of building up over time in a bucket of awe, So it doesn't have to be you don't have to fill your bucket all at once, but you can have little drops in your bucket as you go. And I try to do that too. Just, I can look at this plant behind me, or honestly, we can think about how we're all communicating right now via the internet on microphone. I mean, how does that work? It's amazing, right? So really you can find everywhere. I think it's a mindset of intentionally seeking it out until it becomes more of a habit. And the more you do it, the easier it is, I think.
Seems like that goes kind of hand in hand with like keeping a gratitude journal. I don't actually journal it. I just try to find things to be grateful for every day. I don't know if it would be better for me if I wrote it down, but I at least acknowledge that, not every day is a disaster. And there was actually an article I read about breaking your day into thirds. So if you have like just a horrible morning, well, by noon, that quarter's over. Not quarter, but that third. I'm not good at math. And you can kind of like start over. And when you have that mental mindset of, well, yeah, the morning was, a poop show, then, but, now it's lunchtime and the morning's over, and we can just, that's in the past. And you don't have to let it keep affecting your entire day. Because, when we have a day that starts off poorly, it can affect our whole day. And I love those little mind tweaks that help you get past either a difficult situation or motivate you to do something that's outside your comfort zone.
My dad, who was very wise, but both my parents were very different ways. But one of my father's favorite expressions was the bumps in the road are the road. And, I think, we have to expect that there will be easily many bumps, even in a single day. That's the expectation, and to not respond catastrophically or like this is unfair or this is not the way things should be, it will not be helpful. Yeah.
That's very true. So what other kind of topics are in the book that are beneficial to either somebody living with a neurodegenerative disease or a caregiver of that person?
Well, I think one of the big themes, and it's something that Virginia and I've learned by spending time with people, that's the most beautiful part of our work. I couldn't imagine not seeing a patient or a family, every week. I learned tremendously. But one of the things we've learned is that there are different circuits in the brain that turn on and off. And one of the more beautiful stories that has come out of understanding this is that, in particular, in our chapters 6 and 7 in the book talk about this, that there are a group of patients who have loss of language predominantly, with disease in the front part of the brain on the left side, the dominant side. And in that group of people, there's often awakening of visual creativity, often creativity that these individuals never experienced before. And so for this group of people, it opens up sometimes incredibly beautiful art or gardens or visual abilities to change a machine in a certain way. But I think the bigger principle that is carried with us is that these are very focal brain problems, whether it's Alzheimer's in a memory area or whether it's a progressive aphasia in the language area. And we need to look at the other parts of the brain that, at least early on, work even better when a reciprocal circuit is no longer in effect. So Virginia's work in the case of Alzheimer's has shown that there are lots of really positive emotional things that happen when the back part of the brain that is hit in Alzheimer's is not working. And she could say a word about how some of the emotional systems are actually activated. And we hear stories all the time. I could never get along with my mother. When the early stages of Alzheimer's came, suddenly our relationship was different. Stories of really beautiful abilities to care for grandchildren. Then, Virginia and I are a lot in this field because we love elders. And, we love elders because at one time in our lives, they had these social circuits that were exceptionally tuned and really could understand us as children or young adults. So Virginia might say a word about her Alzheimer's research and emotion.
Yeah, we've done a few studies now looking at changes in empathy in Alzheimer's disease. So there's a few different kinds of empathy. Often people think of cognitive empathy when they're talking about empathy, and that's the ability to recognize emotions in other people, to take their perspective, to think how they would think. There's another form of empathy called emotional empathy, and that is this kind of older form of sharing of emotion that doesn't rely on a lot of complicated cognitive processes. So, you were referring to your dog. If your dog howls and another dog howls with it, that's this emotional kind of affect sharing system. It's the autonomic nervous system, and motor mirroring systems where you mirror and simulate the other individual's internal state. And so humans do this all the time, but animals and infants and other species do this as well. So that's the kind of emotional empathy that we measured in people with Alzheimer's, because again, you don't need very complicated cognitive processing to be able to do it well. And we found that in Alzheimer's disease, as you become more symptomatic, people have gains in that emotional form of empathy. Sometimes it's called emotional contagion. And people become more empathic as certain parts of the brain are atrophying. We think, again, that other parts become more active and more responsive than they used to be. And we've even done some studies looking at people with what's called preclinical Alzheimer's, where you can test them for different proteins in their brain, like amyloid and tau, and see that they're on a path probably to eventually developing the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And even in those preclinical years, before they have any memory changes, people are becoming more emotionally empathic. And the kind of emotional change that is occurring does make them kind of more kind and pro-social, compassionate than they used to be. So it is a kind of positive change. It might not last forever, and it doesn't happen for everybody, because some people do become very anxious and can't kind of regulate the increased emotions that accompany Alzheimer's, but a lot of people do become a little bit nicer for a while. So yeah, it's been a very interesting story to kind of unpack, and we're still working on different studies of that.
That's really interesting because I've heard, my mom was always difficult and she got Alzheimer's and she turned into a real sweetheart. And it's like, well, I didn't experience that. My mom's personality pretty much stayed the same. There just was fewer like social niceties. But there's one thing Virginia said about being a little bit more like in tune to emotions. So in the last 3 years of my mom's life, she would speak in very distinct, clear English words. So it sounded like normal language, like what we're exchanging now, but there was never any context. So if trying to be a respectful, nice person, I would always try to figure out what is she trying to tell me. And if I scrunched up my face, like thinking like, what is she? That facial expression pissed her off almost immediately. And I never could understand why, but maybe it's because she knew that or maybe felt that I was frustrated, struggling, like basically not super negative feelings, but just like, what is she trying to tell me? I'm like, really trying here, lady, but you're not making it very easy. And now I figured she must have picked up on that because, I mean, I'm serious. Like, you could be like, huh? Oh, wait, don't make that face. Don't make that face.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So she had just the sense that she could experience your confusion or frustration. And yeah, so for caregivers, the power of your emotions are huge, and for people with Alzheimer's, they are sensing it. And my friend, when caring for her mom with Alzheimer's, she had all these tricks, but would sing, when her mom didn't want to do something, and then they both sing together, and her mom would jump in the bathtub, and so it was like using these other circuits in the brain that were working really well to help with the difficult things that people might not want to do. It was definitely, yes, I agree that that's probably what was happening.
And
Even 5 years after her passing, I'm still learning things.
Yeah.
I think that's a really wonderful thing about your show, Jennifer, is that the lessons that caregivers learn are so unique. I mean, and of course, by learning, I mean the brain is changing. We don't sometimes appreciate that, but when someone learns about a patient and develops a new strategy, this is creativity, and this isn't bottled anywhere. So to have guests who talk about this and to think about all these lessons, I think is, really, a really beautiful thing.
Thank you. You'd think after 7 years, we're working on year 8 now, we would have run out of things to talk about. There's always new books, new interesting people, new story. I'm like, when I run out of stuff, I'll stop, but I haven't run out of stuff yet. And even though, we might have people who speak on really similar topics, everybody comes with their own perspective and their own experiences. And there was a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I believe, I actually had 2 lawyers on in the same week. So we recorded their episodes in the same week, and it was essentially supposed to be the same topic. But by the time both of them had done their recording, they weren't the same topic, even though they were both like elder care attorney. It was like it was relief because I was like, how did I manage? I thought they were from the same place, so I thought they were the same person. And then when I realized I had basically scheduled 2 attorneys talking about virtually the same thing, I was like, uh-oh, I blundered, but it worked out fine. And it's just amazing how, I like the experiences because you can, talk about how to navigate being a caregiver. And I've got probably 400 guests and, nobody's experiences are the same. So it's always interesting, which is good.
In the last chapter, a lot of which of our book, chapter 8, a lot of it which was written by Virginia, she spells out specific things that caregivers can do, like building resilience. So I think the book has, not only embedded within the other chapters, which are stories with lessons, but the last chapter really, focuses specifically on things that we have learned through neuroscience that can really help caregivers.
Yeah, and a sense of meaning and purpose seems to be a big theme that people experience a lot when caregiving. That's true for, when you have young children, and also true when you're taking care of your parents or relatives. Like, people really find meaning and purpose in that responsibility, and grow and change because of it. So I think that's another positive kind of outcome that can unexpectedly arise even when people aren't really looking for that.
And I'm really big on the story, I think, that has really evolved around exercise. And I think there's just absolutely no doubt that we release chemicals called exocrines. And they are chemicals that if we don't exercise aren't released. And they do things like dampen anxiety, diminish bad mood, actually stimulate neurons to grow. And so I'm a bit of a fanatic about exercise for caregivers and patients. And I think the data we have with exercise in patients is almost as good as some of the drugs. So I think this is something that is really important. And it's exactly the opposite of what typical happen with a caregiver, right? You get so burdened that and flustered and preoccupied that your regular routines like exercise disappear. And of course and that's the other story of the research we've all done, is that if a caregiver is depressed or not doing well, the patient lifespan is diminished. So and vice versa, So I think that if people think, well, I'm just going to focus on my loved one without thinking about myself, they're not only hurting themselves, but they're also hurting their loved ones. So I think these are some of the principles that we try to talk about in the book. And I couldn't agree. Sorry, I'm very excited about the last chapter. But the other thing that I think Virginia, touched on, which is, the sense of meaning. And our society has to do a much better job not of recognizing, not only with words, but financially, what caregivers do. What more important thing can a human being offer than to protect someone who's vulnerable, whether they have mental illness, whether they're a child? These are, the most beautiful jobs that we have. And, I think caregivers, even if they aren't validated by insurance companies or, by people in the news, this is really, really beautiful work.
It's starting to change, but we need almost like we have whole person care for somebody with Alzheimer's or FTD, but we also need like whole person care for the caregiver with, I do legislative advocacy with the Alzheimer's Association and AARP because there's a component to supporting caregivers like myself across the board, socially, with our government, with our corporations, with our nonprofits, with our healthcare system. Like, everybody needs to step up and do a little better, because this disease or these diseases are going to affect everybody at some point. Most of my listeners know I'm a retired portrait photographer, and one of my clients had 3 children, an older son, and then fraternal twins, and the male twin had pretty severe autism. And I was, not directly every day caring for my mom, but my mom was pretty severe Alzheimer's while I was working with this family. They'd been clients for many years. And, I learned a lot about how to deal with him because of my mom, and because of, my mom, I also learned how to deal with him better. And it was just, it changes your perspective. I've seen older kids at grocery stores have total meltdowns. And as a mom who had, I had a perfect child, right? I'm kidding. Your first instinct is, oh, come on, get that kid under control. But once you've experienced, your mom with Alzheimer's having a fit someplace inappropriate, and you've got a client who struggles with that with their younger son, you take a step back and go, oh, wait a minute. This might not be a discipline thing. This might be a brain thing. And all of a sudden now you're a much better member of society, because you're not being all judgy and like, why can't they just get that kid under control?
Yeah.
So I think there's places for everybody to kind of fit into the supporting caregivers, because for better or worse, and I don't want the government to like support everybody because we can't afford it, but there's places that they can do better. And like I said, it's a whole thing. We need a whole societal lifting up of caregivers, and it's changing, but Lord, I don't think it's changing fast enough.
And to your comment about we don't want the government to spend all their money on this. But the other interesting thing that, is happening is AI takes many more people out of work. You know, AI will not take people out of caregiving.
That is true.
This is a very noble activity, and something that I think increasingly we will recognize as a society. We must.
I agree with that. My paternal grandmother lived to 103. That is my goal. Her mind was pretty much fine until she was about 101 and a half. She died like a week after her 103rd birthday. So it was the last year. I think she was having minor strokes. She was mostly blind from glaucoma for years and years and years. And then at about 101, she became profoundly hard of hearing, which I think is kind of a nightmare. She was already a visual person, so I was really surprised that she hung on. She got glaucoma when I was 12, and she died when I was 51. She died yeah, that sounds about right. Like I said, I can do math. And no, I was older than that. So I must have been 54. Now doing math has sidetracked me. Oh, so I was 12. She died when I was 54. That's a long time to live with diminished visual capacity, and then not to be able to hear very well. Ooh, that sounds like solitary confinement in your own brain, and I don't think that's good for anybody.
Yeah, hard. That's one of the things I think as a field we think a lot about is, almost all the resources in health are spent in the last 6 months of someone's life, and figuring out ways of, not only economically being more wise, but also just thinking about, more dignified ways of dying. And, dying with no vision and hearing is, and probably pain that you can't communicate. These are things I think we will get better at with the whole palliative care movement.
That's good to hear, because I got, what is that, 45 years? 46 years? 45 years, I think. Yes. Again, math. So do you have any parting words of wisdom for caregivers on how to take care of our social brains, how to maybe bring a little bit more social, what is the word I'm looking for? Vibrancy into our lives when, it's a challenge, we got a lot to take care of. Now we're trying to be social secretary for ourselves and our loved ones. Just seems like one too many things on the to-do list.
Well, Aristotle, one of our greatest philosophers, said that we are social animals, and we are, just like dogs. I think reading the last chapter of Social Brain really, I think, touches on the really important things that caregivers should do, often don't do. And, and I think I wouldn't say it glorifies, but it really, shows our admiration for this group of people in society and what they're doing. And I think Virginia probably can say it more eloquently than I can.
No, I agree with that. I guess I would kind of repeat what I said earlier about taking in the small moments, and I think sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to do something really, great and big, socially have a big outing or I don't know. And sometimes that can be a lot to plan and organize, and it's becomes another burden on our checklist of things to do. So I think it can be, small things like hearing from a friend, texting with a friend, playing a game on your phone with a friend, chatting for a few minutes, going on a short walk, or taking time for oneself by doing whatever it is that helps you to just relax in just a few minutes, even to take a breather. So, um, those are the things that we can weave in a day that don't require a lot of like planning and organizing. And I do think they help. It's not going to solve any massive problem with being overwhelmed or stressed. I mean, if people feel overwhelmed and stressed to the point of, really suffering, reaching out and getting professional therapy and help is definitely very important. But for the more day-to-day stuff, I think also asking for help is okay. A lot of people do want to help, but don't know how. So sometimes giving permission to people to say, yeah, sure, bring me a meal, or yeah, pick up this grocery item for me. I think most people are really more than happy to do those things if you ask, and we're all just a little hesitant to do that. So
I have one quick, I hope it's quick, last question. You mentioned texting a friend or playing a game on your phone, like, what is that, Words with Friends? How beneficial are parasocial relationships for our brain? Because that's kind of where my life lives a lot. I do have, I do talk to actual humans in person, so it's not exclusive, but between the Peloton and the motivation that I get from those instructors and listening to podcasts and talking to people on Zoom like you guys, that's probably 65% of my socializing. And sometimes I'm like, it feels like enough to me, but I don't know. Is that it's better than sitting in my house by myself for sure.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it probably varies for all of us. Some people crave, in-person interactions, and during the COVID years, I definitely felt that of like, I was so tired of talking to people on Zoom that seeing someone in person was like so rejuvenating. But I think we all probably vary in that. And I agree a lot. You can get a lot out of talking to people on Zoom or online or on your phone. It can't replace human interaction, but it does a lot. And I think the feeling of being connected and feeling a sense of being seen, or that you have a support network to reach out to, that can all be maintained a lot on on the internet and our phones. So yeah, I think it's definitely way better than nothing at all. I think it's really important. It would be great to also have in-person interactions when you can, but only as much as one feels that's, something they look forward to and find restorative.
Sounds awesome. Well, As the listeners know, the book is linked in the show notes, as is the episode with Cindy Weinstein, who is also co-author of a different book with Dr. Miller. And one of these days I'll actually get to UCSF and get to look at your Memory and Aging Center. That's a little trickier now that I'm a little further away than I used to be, but it will happen.
We would love to host you. And thank you for mentioning Mysteries of the Social Brain. It comes out tomorrow, actually. So
that will be April 1st. So this episode comes out after that, but
yes.
I'm sure the book will still be available.
Wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.